now everyone's slowly coming in.
We're still living in this Teams world, aren't we? You know, that we're all we're used to by now, I guess. Yeah.
Yes, we are. Okay, so we'll just wait a minute or two as people actually log on. So I'm just going to, you can see the note pop up there that this session is being recorded. So it will be accessible after the session today. Okay, so 3:02. I think we're okay to kick off now. So first of all, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our event today. To those of you who don't know me, my name is Regina, and I'm the course director of undergraduate science education in UL. UL is the largest educator of science teachers in the country, and our subject specialist areas range from biology, agricultural science, physics, and chemistry. So it's my pleasure to introduce our guest speakers today, Professor Luke O'Neill and Professor Geraldine Mooney Simmie, who graciously accepted my invitation to join our lecture today. So Professor Luke O'Neill is a world-renowned scientist, author, educator, and professor of biochemistry at Trinity College Dublin. He has published over 350 major papers and has 6 main discoveries to his name, including a protein called MAL, which is the master switch for immunity. Professor O'Neill has appeared regularly on TV and the radio, and I'm sure you're all very familiar with his face, and he's published many, many books. So his most recent book is titled To Boldly Go Where No Book Has Gone Before, A Joyous Journey Through All of Science. So really, the book is an accessible kind of history of science book. And it tells the kind of human stories behind the biggest discoveries. Professor Geraldine Mooney Simmie is the chair of STEM education and the director of EpiSTEM, the National Centre for STEM Education. So we're very lucky that that is housed actually in the School of Education in UL. So Geraldine's research interests are in transformative STEM education as an ethical, socio-scientific and cultural problem, and also the interplay between STEM literacies, ethics, justice and democracy. So Geraldine's methodology specialism is recognised in philosophical critique and critical feminist policy analysis in general education and also in STEM teacher education. So in attendance today at this lecture, we have our science education students, so the majority of which are my year 2 students who will commence their school placement next semester. We also have some year 4 students who are currently on school placement across the country. So if their timetable has permitted this and they're not teaching, they'll log on as well. So as an interfaculty programme, we also have colleagues from the Faculty of Science and Engineering and Education and Health Science, and they all teach and support our science education programmes and contribute, I suppose, richly to the development of our science teachers. Also, we have some EpiSTEM affiliates in attendance, and these are colleagues who work within STEM education research. Okay, so that is the introductions complete. So I'll begin with the title of our lecture today. So the title of our lecture is Real Science in School Science. So I suppose what struck me when I was reading Professor O'Neill's latest book was that he said, for me, the science bug really bit when I was 20 years old and I did some proper research for the first time. And this made me think, I suppose, about our own junior cycle and the reforms that have been made in the last few years, mainly the introduction of nature of science. And I suppose that we are now, as teachers, supposed to be embedding these authentic science experiences in school science. So I suppose the general outline of this session is going to be that, firstly, Professor Geraldine Mooney Simmie will pose some questions to Professor O'Neill and I suppose capture his views about how science actually works, his insider view, as he calls it. Then I'll ask you to actually put some questions into the chat throughout the session, and we can spend maybe the last 20 minutes then answering some of those questions. So we basically have an hour for the entire session. I'll just ask that my year 2 students maybe stay on a little bit longer and I can attend to any questions you have. So I am now handing you over to Professor Geraldine Mooney Simmie.
Thank you, Regina. Thank you, and welcome to everybody, and to our guest today, Luke O'Neill. We're here actually celebrating Luke's new book, and he's going to talk to us about that book and about his professional life as a scientist. We are asked in science education now to make sure that we work with the students close to be mini scientists and to put on their white coats and to do their experiments and to have discovery learning, and to also, I suppose, have a joy in this learning. So what I loved about Luke's book when I read it was that bringing across that storytelling and that joy of learning. And this is going to be very valuable for our second years, because storytelling is a wonderful way of inviting maybe non-traditional students, minority students and all into the fray with us, to bring in that lovely storytelling and the joy of the discovery of science. So maybe, Luke, I'll start, but before I start, I'll just say one thing. I know you from the Irish Science Teachers Association.
Yeah.
You're the president there.
That's
You're
right.
a wonderful advocate for science teachers in Ireland. We all know you from RTE and the time of COVID and keeping us calm during the COVID pandemic, but you're a wonderful advocate for the Science Teachers Association and their concerns about maybe making sure there's meat in the sandwich in future curriculum, and that there's science knowledge in there as well. So if I start with, I suppose, how science works is our first question. We want to say to you, you know, teachers are tasked with getting this understanding about science, and we want to get them away from a stereotypical way of doing science. So you, as the professor of biochemistry in Trinity College, how do you create new science knowledge?
Yes, good question, Gerald. That's a great one. But by the way, I love being the president of the ISTA, and all those students listening in. I think we're blessed in Ireland with a fantastic cohort of science teachers, and I travel the world in my capacity as a researcher and immunologist, and I tell people how wonderful our science teachers are, and they all turn up, don't they, Geraldine, for those meetings, and they're wonderful meetings, aren't they? And they're very supportive as well, by the way. So I think it's superb.
Wonderful.
So when I was asked to get involved, I jumped at the chance. Really, the pandemic got in the way during this, as we know, but no, it's a great organisation to be part of, and very much our topic today. I mean, ISTA discusses this a lot, and what should be in the curriculum, how to, develop different aspects of the curriculum, and how to pitch the science agenda. Really, is the question, isn't it? In a sense, Yes. And the book. I'm very happy to plug the book. By the way, is there one for everybody in the audience? No. Have you heard of RTE? No, maybe. Let's not mention RTE. But the book, actually, I was asked to do a brand new history of all of science, which was a bit of a tall order, And I was asked by Penguin in the UK, interestingly. My other books were done with Gill in Ireland. And then one of my books, it was called Never Mind the Bollocks, Here's the Science. That sold a lot, right? Luckily. And then Penguin in the UK saw that. And then they approached me and said, do you want to have a book in the UK as well as Ireland? And I would love that. I'd say make bigger audience, I guess, was part of the motivation, But then they asked me to write a brand new history of science. And that wasn't easy, because there are some good books out. Bill Bryson has a famous book, as we all know, that it's kind of along those lines, But getting to the core of what we're discussing, I guess, I began writing it, and I realized the best way to do this was through storytelling, really, and to describe the scientists and their lives and what they discovered. And that made it a bit easier to write. And I think it also made it hopefully more interesting. And certainly my goal is that the book should be bought by everybody. It doesn't have to be a scientist to buy it. It's not pitched to a scientific audience, And I just wanted to make it interesting. And then once you realize you can teach science in this way as well, I guess, that makes it all the more sort of interesting as a prospect, I think, And what struck me as well, Jeremy, was I realized then, the very quirky stories. Scientists are very interesting people, usually anyway. And they've often got interesting personalities. There's little anecdotes in their lives I build into it as well, really strange little aspects of their stories and so on. And a really important message, of course, is that we want people who think a bit differently to be in science, remember. Because they're the ones who often make progress, because they're challenging the orthodoxy, or they're coming up with a brand new idea that's a bit radical, and hence diversity is key to scientific progress, of course. And my lab at the moment, I think we've 7 nationalities in my lab currently, and from all different backgrounds and different sort of life stories behind them as well. And we love that, because that gives rise to more sort of debate and more chance of new things emerging. So really, in essence, then, I suppose what I'm saying is that this notion of using storytelling, as we're saying, is a really good way to approach it, I guess, is the overall message in the book, you see. And the trick being to keep people engaged.
Yes.
And as you all know, listening in, the challenge is, how do you keep a 15-year-old engaged? You know, now
Yes.
I teach biology the first years in Trinity, and I give lectures. Their first 5 lectures in biology. There's 318-year-olds in front of me. They've come in off the leaving cert. They've done biology in the leaving cert usually, but trying to keep that class interested is a real challenge, you know.
It is.
And again, I learned that trick through giving those lectures, in a sense, you know.
Yeah.
And I realized that if I did it in a kind of a semi-storytelling way, that can make it more interesting and more engaging, really. So,
Yeah.
so that's where the motivation of the book kind of came from those lectures, actually, interestingly.
Yeah. Yeah, well, you've all the colours and you've all the threads running through the book, which I love. I mean, you've brought in, you know, the science has got some great stories, and it also has a dark side.
Yeah.
And it also has different people who've been held back and people who've moved forward, and particularly the women in science and all that.
Yeah.
And you've really done that justice. I love the way you've told the story of, you know, Jocelyn Bell Burnell
Yeah.
and Franklin, you know, Rosalind Franklin. You've brought all that in. So that's a wonderful balance that you have in the book, and all the colour in the stories. And we do want those habits of mind, people who are healthily skeptical and
Yeah.
think of what's a new way of doing this, and can we discover, is there a better way to be doing the world, and all of that.
Exactly.
That really comes across. And we would be saying to the second year students in this lecture really today, take storytelling as a serious pedagogical strategy and a resource.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
search for nice stories to interest and bring the curriculum to life.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And in fact, as well, Jeremy, in the book I mentioned one particular story, which is worth sort of saying now, and this is well known. You know, when I go to a conference and I give a lecture on my research, right? The truth is, people don't remember what you tell them, really. They remember what they felt, and that's always a lesson in how to communicate stuff, really. You know.
Yeah.
Now, when you're a scientist, the emotional aspect is the joy of the discovery, actually. And like a 13 or 14-year-old being told about dinosaurs or whatever, they have an emotional response actually to that, you see. And that's a good thing. You want to get the emotions going, strangely. And people often don't see that science is actually quite an emotional thing.
They don't.
And I write in an incident happened to me. I was over in Oxford about 10 years ago now. And I gave a big lecture to the, you know, very high pressure to Oxford. You know, it wasn't easy. But at the end of my lecture, a little old lady, I mean, she must have been in her 90s, came up to me. And she was in tears. And I'm going, this is unusual. I don't normally get them to burst into tears, you know? And I said to her, oh, listen, thanks very much. I enjoyed your lecture. And it turned out that she was a technician of a guy called Krebs. Now, you all know Krebs cycle, I hope, from biology. Yes. And Krebs had worked in Oxford. And I've mentioned Krebs cycle in my lecture. And she was his technician. And so I hadn't heard him mention in years, she said. And then she said to me, the next day, then she says to me, are you here tomorrow? I said, yes. Oh, I'll have a gift for you. And she came in the next morning, right? And she gave, I have it here. I'm going to show it to you now. Watch this. I've got it here. She gave me this box, right? And in the box was a piece of Krebs's own glassware. Can you believe it? Wow. So this little piece of glassware, if I drop it now, that piece of glassware, that's where Krebs cycle was discovered. Isn't that amazing? You know?
Fabulous.
And she'd kept some of his glassware. Isn't that incredible? You know?
Oh, isn't that absolutely fab? That's a treasure to have.
It's a treasure to have, yeah. And guess what, Geraldine? I actually dropped it. I was so excited. Now, luckily, it bounced and didn't break. I got away with it.
Beautiful, you know? Well-made glassware.
Well-made glassware. But I mentioned that in the book because it's about emotion. Yeah. And an emotional response to something, you know?
Yeah.
And again,
what I like about it is I like the size of it, because I think in terms of green laboratories, we need to get all the schools in Ireland to be thinking of new green laboratories, small glassware. Yeah. You've just started a new trend there now, I think. But anyway, getting to my second question about, we're very interested, of course, in that lovely thread running through your book about, like, I suppose, that real joy of discovery. And we have our friends in the science education community all around the world. And that's very strong message in that affectivity and affect and emotion and the importance of that, because there is a sense that the syntax and grammar of science is very detached and very neutral, and you've got to be very much the neutral person with no blood in your veins at all, if you like.
Yeah.
And so our external examiner to Epistem is Professor Sybil Ergeran, and she's the head of the science education group in Oxford.
Right.
We visit to her now and again, and she keeps a connection with us as well.
Yeah.
But we have that idea that these habits of mind developed in the experimental work. So when our second years go to the school, they will want to have these inquiry skills and habits of mind and reasoning skills. They'll be wanting to develop that with their students. Can you talk a little bit about your understanding of those science habits of mind and reasoning skills?
Yeah, well, again, I suppose as we all know, the beauty of it is science is actually all about evidence and data, remember. So I think that's always very important to say that, as we know, and in fact, that's what drew me to science really initially was, you could say, here's a piece of information, right? And here's the evidence to back it up, you see, and there's the data that supports that. And the reason why I found that so compelling was it's not like being a lawyer, say, or having an opinion on something and there's a sketchy bit of evidence. There's real evidence behind what's being taught in the curriculum. That's all true, basically. And it's true because it's been proven experimentally. So the job of the scientist actually ultimately is to do experiments, to get data, to support an idea or a hypothesis. And now you get the data, and now you can say X about whatever the problem is, and that's a really important aspect of what's happening in the mind of a scientist. So the scientist has to be hungry for data, has to be skeptical of the data they get, of course. And in my lab now behind me, literally just out the door there, we repeat things, we think of controls, we're never fully happy until we get really definitive evidence that we can really stand over, and that notion then of unease is an important one, Geraldine, as well. I think most scientists have a strange unease about them because they're not fully satisfied until they get to the bottom line,
Yeah.
And I'm only ever fully happy when we publish a paper, say. I'm only ever fully happy when some other lab repeats it in America or Japan or whatever it is, because that means it's true. It's not based on the Liffey water, say, or some aspect of some artifact of our lab, So again, that's a very important aspect of this as well.
Yeah.
But I think in terms of the students and the way you do this pedagogically, I guess, they've got to do experiments themselves to generate data. You see.
Yeah.
Now, I know that's a challenge because it needs equipment and it needs organizing and all that kind of stuff, But that's a very important thing for young scientists to do because they're now generating data, they're interpreting it, they're drawing graphs, they're analyzing the data. That's a very important skill for any scientist to have. And then you can bring in statistics, you can bring in N numbers, all those things are very interesting, And then some of the students that the teachers will be talking to are very mathematically minded, as they'll remember. And they're drawn to the more quantitative aspects, which is good as well, you see. Yes. So again, but it has to, it's a very important aspect is actually the notion that science is backed by data, basically.
Yeah.
And then
I think that's one of the things. I mean, my own science teacher in Liston-Varna years and years ago taught us that healthy skepticism, always doing the experiments, bringing in the data, and then kind of always saying, so what? And poking it again to kind of be able to refute it as much as to agree with it. So you're never really fully happy with it, and you're working, and that's your discovery mindset in a way. You've, like, when you talk about all the nationalities you've in your lab, what I love about it is you've obviously got a real cosmopolitan outlook then as well.
Very much so.
Which that's another habit of the scientist, kind of an open mind, critical questioning, critique, being able to weigh things up with evidence, and as you say, like the deductive analysis and all the different approaches.
That's right. The best scientists want to be questioned, remember, and want to be sort of criticized, actually, in a nice way. So I've just come back from a conference. I was at a conference in Argentina. The other thing everybody should know, when you're a scientist, you get to travel. It's great, because I was invited to the Argentinian Immunology Society, you see. And there must have been 500 immunologists gathering in a place called San Luis near Buenos Aires, And I gave my lecture, and there must have been 10 questions digging into me, in a good way, Oh, I think you're wrong there. Have you thought of this experiment to back up what you're doing? And afterwards, then at the coffee break, I could go up to them and say, can we collaborate? Can we help? So in other words, the best of science is actually to be questioning and to be always prepared for criticism. And what's very important, get it out in the open. The worst part of the COVID thing for me was the attacks that were coming from unreasonable people, right?
Yes.
The beauty of science is it should be about reason,
Yeah.
And if someone produces data, I can't really refute that. I've got to accept it, The trouble is, once you enter into the public arena, it gets more
Yes.
challenging, and especially
Well,
with
I
the
think
various
your public,
agendas.
I understand the public arena as you bring in there. I think that has the space there for ethics, politics, theology. You're bringing in, you're joining in the science then with other fields as well. It is interdisciplinary. But I love the idea of what you're talking about there is one of the things we try and teach our students is to be able to have constructive critique
Yeah, exactly.
about themselves, their teaching. One of the key pieces for us is to be a really good teacher is to never rest on your laurels and to always keep learning.
Well, it's
And
great
if
to
you
have the
do
students,
that, you're going to be a great teacher.
and the great to have the students challenging you, because that keeps you alive yourself in a way. That's good. That's part of the process.
Exactly. And of
I
course,
always
it's a
quote
big
Erasmus.
part of science, that argumentation and capacity to argue in a very healthy way with good sound reasoning.
That's right. And Erasmus, the famous Erasmus, you know, one of his great quotes was, "We'd only get to the truth through reasoned debate." If the debate's too heated, people's minds run off and they get very annoyed, and you won't get to the truth unless the debate is reasonable, was his view. And that's very true, you know, and that's what we're talking about, really, you know.
Yeah, and I think that's something, another thread going through your book is that we really do need people to have science literacy for all in the world nowadays, as opposed to maybe 50, 60 years ago when it was everybody supported science, but science was just for a few people, maybe an elite even. And we need people with good general scientific literacy in the world now, so that those decisions around artificial intelligence and all those things going forward, at least we're making them as informed citizens.
That's right. Well, I know this is your specialty, and I'm 100% behind you on this. It's about democracy, actually, ultimately.
Yeah.
Because how can you have an informed population to make their minds up about something very important like climate change, as you say, AI, whatever it might be, unless they're scientifically literate? So scientific literacy, to me, actually, the democratic aspect is really central to it, because you want to have an educated population. And Ireland, one of the things we're proudest of, as you would agree, is the vaccine uptake was massive in Ireland.
Massive,
And the reason for that was a good education system. That was the key part of that, because people themselves could look at the data, look at the evidence, hear experts, and hopefully believe some of them anyway, you know, and make their own minds up. I will take that vaccine, you know, and that needed a good education system. So the teachers, the science students deserve credit for that as well.
That's there with the Young Scientist competition. You can see every year the fantastic uptake and the teachers supporting that. So I think we're beginning from a good place, and it's about making sure we keep stretching ourselves and challenging ourselves always to be, because obviously we need really good social consciousness now as well. So we care for one another in the world. In that moral compass and ethics piece is very important for us as educators as well. So when I ask you about the third question there is, I meant to ask you something about communicating in science. And I know, sure, look at you're the science communicator for us in Ireland. The importance of communicating science to general population. Isn't that what you're doing? You're educating people and improving literacy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's interesting as well how I got into it, to be honest, because obviously my prime job is to be a scientist, which means to run my lab and do experiments and try to discover things about the immune system. That's mission one here, you know. But then I'm a teacher as well, remember. So, and when I began giving those first year lectures, I suddenly quite liked it, you know. And they're a bit like a lay audience, even though they've got biology from the leaving, they're still 18, you know. They know a little bit of biology, but not a lot. So I began to realize, I quite enjoy this now, telling them stuff and spreading this information that I have and sharing it, really. And that gave me a bit of a kick, you know. And then the next thing then was the science gallery in Trinity, as you may remember, Jen. That was a great addition to us. And I got involved in that, and I'd be giving lectures to the public and so on. And then it was from there that it went to being on the radio. The link there was a woman called Ingrid Hook. Now, Ingrid was in pharmacy in Trinity. Her husband was George Hook. And she got me onto his show initially. That was my first time on the radio, you know. And then Pat Kenny arrives. He asked me to go to his show, you know, and the whole thing began to escalate the way, you know. So for me, it's no different to me teaching the students at all, actually. It's a continuum here, you know. And why wouldn't I share my knowledge? It's like all teachers, the kick you get from teaching is in part providing this wonderful knowledge to the next generation, you know, however it might be. And that's what that's all about. But the trick then becomes, how do you do it? How do you do it in a way that's accessible and understandable and all that kind of thing, and that takes a bit of skill.
That's it. It is the power. I remember a philosopher in Maynooth saying to me, Pádraig Hogan, once, that it's actually having this power to influence with honor. that you have
Oh,
this
yeah,
opportunity, you can influence with honor.
That's a
So
great
you've got to be
phrase.
careful how you do it, of course, and it
Yeah.
has to be measured and careful and all of that, because you have that chance to influence and the next generation. You
That's
want
right.
the young people to think, you want them to think for themselves. We want them to think to make the world a better place.
Exactly.
Find out what's going on, understand the history of the science. You've made it easy for them now.
Yeah,
and
that's right.
and have that and a joy in working with others to make it better, because a lot of the problems we have in the world at the moment are possibly problems that are bigger than all of us individually.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and in fact, the book I described, as we know, science is extremely social as an activity. Interestingly, people don't expect. See, the average person thinks scientists are nerdy people,
Yes.
on their own in a lab somewhere with buck teeth and thick glasses or whatever the stereotype is.
Yes.
But the fact is, we work in teams and we collaborate hugely. My last big paper was back in May. There were 8 collaborating universities on that paper, for example, and the reason why we collaborate is because they bring a new idea, maybe, or a new technique, a new sort of approach that they would have that I wouldn't, and then we collaborate, and we love that bit. I love the bit of sitting down with collaborators and going through data and trying to figure out what to do next, kind of thing. So it's extremely collaborative, and a very sociable thing to do. I think one of the lines in the book I use, Geraldine, is it's the best reality TV show ever, science, really, because we're all in a house together, and there's all these personalities and different sort of and of course, as you say, I do talk a lot about the envy and the rivalry and the negative aspects as well, because they're humans. Science is human beings. Yeah, they're human beings, They'll be very competitive. They'll occasionally misbehave, like all humans do,
Yes.
And that's the reality of it, you see.
That is that's so true, and that's fabulously done in the book, I think, as well. And it's very important, because one of the big tasks for us as teachers, and as teachers of young people, teaching science to young people and our students now when they go to schools, they have to humanize this discipline as well, to make it interesting, to make it roll off the page, make it exciting, show the discoveries, give space for people to be creative and think, and let people find a love of the subject themselves as well.
That's right, exactly. And as we know, it's a hard graft. Science is not an easy option for people, remember. And I think the big challenge that young teachers have nowadays is all this competing stuff that's distracting the students,
Yes.
And how do you keep science relevant to them in a way that will make them sort of go after science as opposed to something else,
Yes.
And that's a challenge. It's more challenging than ever. Of course, on the other hand, there's great tools to use now for science, remember. I mean, the dreaded ChatGPT and things like that,
Yeah.
But there's new tools out there as well all the time to convey science.
All the time.
Which is tremendous,
And
one
all
example
the
I gave
tools can be used. It's about being smart and using them all.
That's right. Yeah, and one example I gave recently was I was lucky enough to go to U2 in Vegas. Can you believe it? I went to the show in Las Vegas.
Oh wow!
Now that venue, you've never seen the like of it. It's like it's like a massive sort of a huge big screen with 75,000 little LED things on them.
Yeah, and
it's all in
a spherical.
It's
all a big sphere.
Yeah. And I'm sitting there listening to them, and the sound is pristine because all the speakers are. It's the most high-tech venue ever built, this place, right? The Sphere. It cost 2.2 billion to build. Can you believe it? And as I said, you could have built a hospital with that. But anyway, the resolution. And I'm thinking, I'm sitting there listening to U2. I'm imagining DNA going across the screen, or mitochondria moving and all that. In other words, you can illustrate science fantastically through that sort of thing as well. Remember. So I think the beauty of this new tech is there's great ways to show science, really, using these various approaches as well,
Yeah, but there's great stories behind it. I remember when John and I were in Texas in 1981, and we lost the Challenger that time. The first science teacher went off on the space exploration.
That's right.
And it was so sad. But I remember reading in Time magazine, I think it was, or Scientific American, or one of those. I remember reading about how they discovered that it was the O-ring that had frayed, because they were heating it up in the lab, but the lads got really tired and they went to a McDonald's and they drank a Coke, and as somebody was drinking the Coke, he was looking at the ice cubes and he thought, oh my God, maybe we should be making these cooler and cooler rather than warmer and warmer.
Oh my God, yeah.
And they went back and they discovered 3 nights before the flight took off, there was frost in Cape Canaveral.
Ah, right, okay. Now that's a great story, as well, isn't it? It's a great way to illustrate things, to use that as a story. Great, yeah.
Yeah, and another one that I used to love telling students was like Einstein, of course, working out of the drawer when he was in the patent office and he was doing the drawings, and then he was working on the bottom drawer for his E equals MC squared. And of course, he was a theoretical physicist, so he didn't need a lab.
No, that's right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. A patent clerk, basically. A patent clerk discovered quantum physics, really. It is incredible.
Yeah, a fantastic discovery as well. So, and some discoveries were even made by serendipity.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, that's a good thing to tell the students as well, by the way, you see, because often the big discoveries were a bit of an accident. Like penicillin is a great example. I talk about that in the book. Alexander Fleming, that was just looking away. Spores blew in the window of his lab, landed on the dish, and then he noticed it killed the bacteria. Now, of course, this to prepared, as Pasteur said, I mentioned that, it favors the prepared mind. Serendipity favors the mind that's prepared. He could see what was going on. Oh, look at that now. But if he hadn't had the window open, it wouldn't have happened. So,
and if you hadn't that good mind to look and see, well, there's an anomaly here. What's that about?
Yeah, exactly. But the notion, a good thing to talk about briefly, the notion of where ideas come from and how you make progress in science, because that's unusual as well to think about, And new ideas often come when you're asleep,
Yes.
Or you're
I mean,
look at luck
isn't that the story of Kekula's dream when he
right.
found benzene, the benzene ring, the famous story that he dreamed. I don't know the detail, but I remember him, Kekula's dream.
It was a snake eating its own tail.
Yeah.
And then, maybe it's a ring. That's the regular. The other one I like it in the book, I mentioned this guy, Lowy. Now, Lowy was a neuroscientist who discovered acetylcholine, this neurotransmitter in the brain, right? And he dreamt about that. And he woke up in the middle of the night with this idea. There must be some chemical between neurons, was the idea. There's the neurotransmitters. And didn't he forget to write it down? And he couldn't remember it. And he spent the whole day trying to remember the dream, right? He couldn't remember it. Went to sleep the next night and he had the same dream. And he woke up and wrote it down. So if he hadn't had a pencil and pen beside the bed or a piece of pen and paper, he wouldn't have captured the dream. I love those little stories.
I love it because for me, it's another one of our habits of mind, the creativity, the importance of imagination, thinking outside the box, lateral thinking. I mean, these are all things that we'd say to the students, and we'd hope that they would implement in their classroom. But that whole science operates on a mindset that is open, creative, and skeptical, and willing to learn, and willing to put in then a lot of hard work doing the experiments and and looking at the data and looking for anomalies.
Yeah. The challenge, I think, as well, John, is learning the vocabulary is tough for them as well. Remember, you've got to learn. It's like learning a language, isn't it? Let's face it. There's a lot of hard graft to learn Irish or French or German. But then once you've learned it, you can read these great novels, you see.
Yeah.
And science is a bit like that. It's tough for them. So the challenge I think science teachers have is actually getting that vocabulary to them in a way that they can enjoy and understand and get enthused about, because it's not easy, Like you wouldn't teach the periodic table very boringly. That would turn them off. You got to have ways into it to get them interested. And that's I can see that's a big challenge. And I'm sure that's part of what we're talking about in a sense, isn't it? Are there innovative ways to do this and there could be great ideas here, remember? New ways of doing things could be great, couldn't it? To convey these.
Well, I did my PhD in STEM education in Trinity. And I got it in 2009. And actually, I worked with people in Norway, and we didn't have a lot of English in common, but actually I discovered, I suppose, science is the universal language.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So there is you're actually teaching a language as well when you're teaching science.
Yep.
You're teaching the grammar, the syntax, the language, the way of operating, as well as all the skills. So it's an entire package.
That's right, exactly. Yeah, there's an awful lot going on in a sense, Geraldine. And I imagine pedagogically, which I know is your area of course, it's a complicated business, isn't it, in a sense, you know?
But you're talking about the psychic rewards when it goes well, and when the students have light bulb moments, that keeps us going. I mean, no matter how many years I'm teaching, I still get a buzz when the students get what I'm saying or doing with them.
Oh, same for me. I mean, same for me when I see them learn stuff, and you're kind of waiting for when the exams come round, especially the finals. I teach a lot the final year as well. And when I get great answers back off, this is great. They really got it. I've done something here. I've helped them interrogate the complexity. And remember as well, in immunology as an example, now it won't quite apply to second level. There's so much information out there now, And your job is to take them by the hand in a way and lead them to where the key nuggets are. That's a very important part of the process as well, I think,
Yeah. So I think our last final question was about, we've probably answered it already, because as you can imagine in science education and with student teachers, we have, I kind of call it the rubber bands. We're looking at the contradictions and pulling between bits and pieces. So not only the laws of physics, but also philosophy, theology, ethics, the importance, and then that pull, as you say, into politics and democracy. I mean, I kind of call it, maybe it's the rubber bandits I should be calling it, but it's that, you know, that critical thinking and ethics and lots of things that we might be able to do as scientists, but we're not going to do them because we have a moral compass that says, no, we're not going to go there. That piece around democracy as well.
That's right. I mean, I think the big message there, Jan, I think from my point of view, from that point that you're raising, is as follows. When you're teaching someone science, you're doing an awful lot. You're not just teaching them, here are facts you need to learn about, you know, plants or animals or physics or whatever, the carbon, whatever it is. You're not just teaching them facts. You're doing an awful lot more than that. It's reasoning skills. It's looking at data. It's supporting information that will allow you to state something clearly, that kind of thing, you know. And that's the add-on, of course. Now, the joy of teaching them about astronomy, or that's fantastic anyway. And remember, it should start with that. It should start with the joy of science, I think, and you begin with that. But then it goes well beyond that into things that we've just been discussing, using reason, using data, and then well beyond that even further into things like democracy and ethics and those sorts of issues. They're all part of it. So in other words, it's the best subject by far to be teaching. I'm biased, obviously, you know, but I really believe that.
I think that it is lovely. I think that is the lovely piece, that when you're not just, when you're teaching, you're not coming from nowhere. You're not coming from nowhere. You're bringing in yourself into the classroom, and you actually are. There's a moral compass there, and there's all other things going on in there as well. So, exactly. I mean, I think that's the important piece. So we want teachers to explore reflexively themselves, obviously, very well, because they need to be able to do that as well, to be excellent teachers into the future.
And you're making a better society by being a science teacher, actually, I think, as well.
Yes.
Because you're getting, like, let's take the vaccine as an example, you know. Now, can you imagine some countries there was 30-40% uptake? That directly led to deaths in that country. You know, millions of people died because they wouldn't take the vaccine, right?
Yes.
In Ireland, our education system, and I really believe this, allowed our people to engage with the complexity of that and make their own minds up, and then be 95% uptake. And that saved lives. So strangely, even though it may be I'm slightly overstating it, but I might as well. It was teachers that saved those lives, and they were part of that process. Because they were educating the people.
There's quite a bit in the literature, I suppose, that the teacher is a public intellectual doing that service for society, and it is a connected piece. And the other piece, I suppose, about it that I think was very good about Ireland with the COVID story is that we're pragmatists. So we didn't go for our zero tolerance, even though that was an argument that was very well made and was tempting, especially when we looked at New Zealand. And yet we were pragmatists, and we thought, look, you have to balance mental health and people and care for the elderly and all, you know, we have to balance other things with our good science knowledge. And that's the piece that makes it, for me, a really decent democracy then.
Yeah, that's right. And we are blessed a bit with good politicians, loath though we are to give them credit sometimes.
Of course.
I think Brad Kerr, Micheál Martin, they're very tuned in people. They're very clever. Luckily, unlike the UK, and you may have seen lately with this inquiry about COVID in the UK, they've said that those politicians did not understand science. It's not a damning thing to say. And then yesterday, Chris Whitty said they couldn't read the graphs. Can you believe it, these politicians?
No.
And in fact, while I'm at it, I had to bang on a bit more in the book, but I talk about Florence Nightingale, right? Now, we all know her because she was a great nurse. She was the founder of the modern era of nursing, right? She goes to the Crimea as a nurse and realizes they're all dying in the hospitals of infections, not on the battlefield. But the politicians wouldn't believe her. And she'd send them graphs, and they couldn't read the graphs. So guess what she used, Geraldine? A pie chart. She was one of the first people to use a pie chart to document statistics in a way, and she realized these stupid, in inverted commas, politicians, they'll understand the pie chart, you know, like 75% are dying, it's all black on the pie chart, you know, and she deployed the pie chart. Now, I thought it was a real sad indictment on the UK that Chris Whitty said the politicians couldn't understand science. Whereas in Ireland, I have to say, I think our politicians are a bit more scientific literate, and I'm sure that's the education they got partly. up to the age of what I mean. The science and the curriculum all the way through to about 16 at a minimum, probably. That's a great thing, because then whatever you do in life, you've got that behind you, you know. And the politicians, I think, benefited from that themselves, and then could approach things from a scientific point of view.
Oh, very much. I think we are very pro science, and I think for me it's like that. If we can keep it with that open mind and healthy skepticism and constructive critique in it, we won't go wrong then if we work that way. I think scientific knowledge is absolutely fabulous, but I don't know that knowledge on its own is going to get us solving all the problems in the world either. So we need all the other pieces of the jigsaw to come together as well.
Oh, we don't know. I agree entirely. It's not as simple as there's a lot more going on, of course, isn't there? You know?
Yeah.
I think
anyway, listen, it's been a joy talking to you. I'm going to hand you back to Regina, and I'm sure I'll see you at the next ISTA as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you, Luke.
Thanks, Geraldine.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Geraldine, and thanks, Luke. So we're now going to take some questions from the audience. So if you'd like to insert your questions into the chat, Luke and Geraldine would be very happy to answer any questions you have. And maybe while you're thinking, I might ask one, since I have direct access here. So I think it's interesting that you were talking about, I suppose, the political side of things. And I suppose when we think of scientists, we just think of them working on their discoveries. But I suppose, how much interaction do you actually have with politicians?
Yeah, no, it's not much, Regina, really. You know, I haven't said that, right? Yeah. All through the pandemic, and this is me about to name drop here. Leo Varadkar and Micheál Martin rang me a couple of times, you know, and asked my opinion on how it's going and stuff, you know.
Oh my gosh.
And on New Year's Eve, at the darkest hour, remember in 2020, we had the so-called meaningful Christmas. Do you remember that? And we opened up, and then there was a massive increase in cases, right?
Yes.
And it was a very stressful time for everybody. I was doing my bit in the media. Micheál Martin rang me on New Year's Eve to thank me. He said, "Thanks for all the things you're doing for Ireland," you know. So that was quite nice, you know. So I think we could do more there. A few years ago, there was a kind of a committee of TDs, and they would meet with scientists regularly. Maybe we could reintroduce that. That might be a good idea, you know. So I'd like to see more of that. But yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because they're pretty busy with other things, I guess. But certainly Simon Harris is very interesting. As you know, he's the minister really in charge of all this. And then we've got Norma Foley. I'd say that they're engaged. They turn up at conferences and stuff like that. So we do see them at that level, you know. But I think the more we can talk to politicians, the better, really.
Yeah, and I suppose
I think that too. I've worked with politicians and policymakers over the years on different projects. When I was a young teacher years back in the 1990s, I volunteered a few hours every Saturday at Michael D's clinic in Galway.
Oh, very good. Yeah.
And that was even before he became a minister. He had only 2 or 3 people coming, and then when he became a minister, he had about 200 or 300. And I was there with the clipboard, being the science teacher, registering everyone in the clinic.
Oh, very good. Yeah.
So I did a bit of canvassing for Democracy Matters in Ireland when the government decided they were going to shut the Senate. I still believe that the Senate is the upper house and is a place we should be doing more critical debate about everything.
Yeah, that's true. And we need more scientists in the Senate, actually. Don't we?
In the Senate, absolutely. Great, you know? Yeah.
And I know this again is a bit in my favor, but I was approached, can you believe it, what I'd be interested in running for president, get this, during the pandemic. And I said, I'm a bit busy, you know, and the guy who asked me was a very eminent, he was a very eminent venture capitalist, to be honest, but he's a scientist, you know. And he said, wouldn't it be great if Ireland had a scientist as president? Wouldn't that be a fantastic thing for our country? You know, it shows Ireland's fully matured, as it were. You just kind of.
I know another thing you did, didn't you? Go to Ukraine and do some work in Ukraine.
I did indeed, Jenny. Yeah, that's right, exactly right. Yeah, me and some medical friends of mine, we took some medical supplies to Ukraine, and that was great because I could leverage my media contacts there. We raised 400 grand in the end, actually. Yes. From the Irish public, which is brilliant, you know, because I could use my connections with Claire Byrne and Pat Kenny to publicise this, and loads of money came in. We ended up raising an awful lot of money, which is great. At that time, it was needed because they'd no medical supplies at that time.
No medical supplies. I remember that I remember that. Yep. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, we have some questions in the chat. So from Finian, he says, what do you think is the best approach to incorporate and relate the real life applications of science into the classroom through case studies, research projects, experiments, or a combination?
I think all of that, really. And I mean, obviously, what is the question? What does real life mean? You want to make it relevant to them, you know, and however you can do that to make it relevant to their lives in particular, you know. So a great way into science and I do this in my podcast. I try to pick topics that are real life problems or issues, and I get sent a lot of requests to cover topics in the podcast, you know. So for example, if you talk about human health is a great one, and nutrition, use that as an example, you know, talk about the nutrients, talk about metabolism in the body. And then one great one I talk about is what diets work, for instance. And there's been a scientific analysis. This sounds a bit wacky at one level, but they've analyzed 35 separate diets. Only one worked, and that was the Weight Watchers program. That was proven scientifically and statistically to work. Now, there's a great real life example, isn't it, of using data analysis to say, and GPs, it was Johns Hopkins did that analysis, by the way, and they advise GPs which diet to recommend to their patients, isn't it? Because there's a real world application there, you know. Yeah. So anywhere you can get real life, real world applications in. Now, the experimental bit's a bit tricky. That's harder to achieve, because doing those experiments can be tough, as we know. But there are some very straightforward experiments to illustrate nutrition, even, you know, like respiration or things like that, you know. So you can bring a practical into it as well. So every topic could have a practical element to it. And the job of the practical is to ram home the message partly, and also the data bit. So it's very useful to have some kind of practical aspect to it, of data gathering or some kind of analysis. You can bring it all together into one reading that way.
Yeah. I think the idea, Regina, yourself, you used to do fabulous, worksheets and everything for us in Epistem there. One time you were editor of our science journal. I think we could also get students, I suppose you could give them a nudge in the direction of giving them some names of people in science and sending them off to actually discover themselves about their life stories and come back and tell the class and let them be the storytellers.
That'd be great. Yeah, so that's a great idea. Yeah, and remember, the thing is, as we've been discussing, if they can do an experiment that discovers something, you see, now it's a challenge, of course it is. I know that's part of the curriculum anyway, you know, but you might understand, and the young scientists, that's what that's all about, you know. But if you get someone to say, look, there's a puzzle here. Now remember, science is actually about solving puzzles, really, you know. So like my puzzle is, why do you get rheumatoid arthritis? We don't know. You know, it's still a puzzle, you know. So if you set a puzzle for them and trying to find something out and try to answer the puzzle, they enjoy that. We love solving puzzles as humans. And they can be word games, they can be whatever it is, you know. So bringing in a discovery aspect into a practical can be useful as well, if it's possible, you know.
Okay, I'd just like to also say that podcasts are a really good way from credible scientists to get all students engaged in science content, because sometimes when we're trying to find credible information, it's very text heavy. However, you know, if you have a class of students maybe where the reader age is not, as high, podcasts are really useful.
Yeah, and I could put my own in. I've recorded about 150 of them at News Talk now. They're about 10 minutes long. They're short, you know.
Oh, that's perfect.
They're on Spotify. It's called Show Me the Science, you see. And I've done about 140 of them, you know. So there may be one, not just me. You will find great podcasts around a specific topic. And then, of course, this generation, they live on podcasts, don't they, a lot of them? So it's a way to get to them in a way that they will find useful, you know, or at least they'll be able to sort of relate to, I guess is the word, isn't it?
Okay, I have another question here in relation to getting students interested in science while teaching, where in schools, maybe they're not interested in education due to maybe the resources or for any other reasons. That's from Connor.
That's the big challenge, obviously. And there'll be some students, because of their background or their home life might be challenging, whatever it is, and you're trying to get them interested in this stuff that seems a bit arcane. It seems a bit sort of a, you know, shall we say, irrelevant to them. And again, the relevancy thing has to come in that way, I think, and make it as relevant as possible. I'll be very supportive and say to them, I know this is tough for you. I'm going to do my best to help you get through this. And if you do, it'll be great, you know. And then the other thing to remind them of, by the way, it can often be to do with socioeconomic issues. The future of employment is in science, remember. So if you get a good science background, that increases your chance of a career and getting a job and making a living in a job that's very relevant, you know. So again, that can be a thing you can pitch to them. Describe some of the careers, say. In other words, the question is, how do you motivate them to get interested? It's these tricks.
And one of the things I think we could do there as well is, what you've got to do with students like that is you've got to get them telling you, filling in little forms and telling you what their interests are and the things they love themselves. And if they're mad into music, you can use that as a starting way into sound and physics. You can pull them into the music and get them in there into the physics of sound nicely. You can kind of seduce them in. If they like cooking, you can give them one example of making mayonnaise and making an emulsion. You can do things, you can bring science, like if they like animals or whatever, you can kind of pull in from their real life experience a bit of science in around all of it. And you've got to catch them where their lives are at.
Yeah, what I've heard as well, over the years here is, I know I'm getting somewhere when a parent says to me, my daughter came home from one of your lectures and told me this, because that means they've really been excited about it and they want to relate that information to someone else, because it is a chain of events in a way,
It is.
because if you teach a student something and they want to tell other people, that's a great thing. It amplifies the whole process, doesn't it? That's something I keep in mind as well.
I have another question here from Pat, who's an experienced science teacher and a colleague in the School of Education now. He said, I think we definitely miss students with an aptitude for science, with the fear of physics and maths. Any ideas how we might overcome this?
Oh, that's a great question, Pat, as well. Yeah, no, I've no magic answer to that one. Yeah, I think it's to do with numeracy, a lot of that actually, and they get put off because they see themselves as no good at maths or no good at calculations and these sorts of things, and that in numeracy then will put them off physics. They're often drawn to biology, some of those students, by the way, because biology is inclined to be less numerate, I suppose, and less quantitative in that way, and maybe biology is a way in, but to get them into physics and maths, you've got to make them confident with numbers, and maybe it's the primary school is extremely important, by the way, and we haven't discussed that. I think we need to invest a lot more in primary teaching science, by the way. We should be looking at that closely too, because obviously that's a key phase in the process, But some students, if they're put off by maths in primary school, it's very hard to get them back. And I don't know of any organisation, Geraldine, of anybody who's managed to come up with ways to do it. But it's a real challenge, isn't it?
Well, I mean, I taught maths for years as a secondary school teacher, and I think you've got to use models, you've got to use storytelling. You still have to humanize those disciplines. They're often taught in the most dry and most boring way, as a series of one equation after the other. And you've kind of got to teach for understanding. And that means you've got to find ways of that for yourself. You have to keep yourself learning. That's really tough, because we're probably trying to teach the subjects. In those subjects, we're probably trying to teach in ways we never saw those subjects being taught, because the mathematician is the most pure scientist of all, with the abstract thinking, and they generally aren't bothered about trying to make the thing humanized.
No. That's the challenge, because mathematicians are well away from the human element, kind of,
kind of.
But then again, you can use examples. I saw a great thing recently. You know the movie Hidden Figures? You remember this movie? It's about these women that work for NASA,
Yeah.
And they were mathematicians. And it was
that was a brilliant movie.
And it was their calculations that made sure that was a safe mission to the moon, and Alan Shepard and all that. And if you read that, there's a good book about that. And one particular mathematician, I mentioned her in my book, actually, Catherine Thompson, her name is. She was the key person. She spotted errors in some of the mathematics. Yeah. And if she hadn't spotted that, it would have crashed, this kind of thing. So again, you can show how That's
right. And of course, that woman's story of mathematician is very interesting, because when we all remember that there wasn't even a bathroom for women in the building.
That's right. Yeah. No, it's a great movie that depicts that era as well, of course, Jenny. It was fantastic for that too, And they were black, which was another huge thing as well, because that was very rare.
They were, which was another difficulty. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. And they were key to the whole discovery.
But again, that's a useful one, because you can do the sums yourself, strangely, I've noticed, the trajectories and those kinds of things. This would be more for 5th and 6th year, probably, But you can see how the calculations, and to get to the moon wasn't that difficult scientifically. All you needed was Newton's laws of physics and a rocket,
Yeah.
And we got to the moon.
I think I suppose at a national level, it would be great if we could get an understanding that we need a small budget for science and maths classrooms. So in other words, we'd have maths teachers trying to look for things, whether it was videos or models or whatever, and that they wouldn't just say, well, the kids have come in from primary school and we can now stay all so theoretical all the way through. It's that interplay between theory and practice is what is exciting about teaching.
Yeah. That's right, and particularly of all the sciences, in the broadest sense, maths is probably one of the more challenging ones. And I wonder what's going on out there in terms of getting better ways to do it, this kind of thing. Yeah. And maybe we in Ireland could come up with innovative ways to do it that could lead the world.
I mean, we offer an upskilling program for every maths teacher in the country. We've been doing it for years with the department, and it's quite a challenge too. But we are upskilling hundreds, if not thousands, of maths teachers, getting them upskilled in maths, so that at least they have the maths knowledge.
Exactly.
But how to teach it is always a challenge.
It's a challenge. Yeah. I think of all the sciences, biology is probably the most straightforward, because again, they can relate to it more.
Yeah. But it's connected more to the human.
End of the spectrum. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we'll have one more question here, and this is in relation to, I suppose, lack of curriculum alignment, really. So Leah is saying that for students who have a real interest in Earth and space and junior cycle, how can we keep them interested and motivated to continue to learn in that area when there isn't much of an area covered in the Leaving Cert?
That's a shocker, Lee, isn't it? Yes, I mean, it's such an important subject, isn't it? Especially with regard to climate change, for instance, you know.
Mm.
So that needs curriculum, and I know it's a tough topic, the curriculum reform notion, and how do we get that into the curriculum and reform the curriculum, you know? And I believe there was agriculture, wasn't there, Jenny? The last ISTI I was at, there was a discussion around the agriculture, which was a bit of a mess, wasn't it? The curriculum was felt to be not good enough. That'd be one subject I could come into, for instance, you know.
Yeah.
So, but I think it's about lobbying and about, you know, and in fact, Leah could lobby for this herself ultimately to get more of that into the curriculum. The trouble is, the
very
curriculum
much,
has to be
because
finite.
that whole area of astronomy, that's really a marvelous one for people having a consciousness of being on planet Earth in a universe.
Yeah.
I mean, if we could see our address as being a planet in a universe, maybe we'd take care of our dwelling home.
Well, exactly. Yeah, and astronomy is a fantastic subject. Let's face it. It's to me, the two big ones kids get is astronomy and dinosaurs. They're always the big ones, you know. Especially at primary
I love
level.
astronomy. I used to use it. I used to do an astronomy club with students in school and everything. Yeah, I love astronomy because it really does give you, you know, the big sustainable problems that we have in the world and climate action and everything all have to do with you understanding that bigger picture.
Yeah, and in my case, in a university situation, which is a bit different, immunology is always advancing. How do you teach a subject that's moving all the time? What do you drop off to bring in the new stuff? That's always the question. Like, what do you leave off? And there's debates about this. And in the end, the degree we do now in immunology is quite different to what it was 5 years ago because of all these recent advances. So you leave off one or two aspects that you feel aren't core. Now that could happen with this. In other words, if you look at the curriculum again and go, oh, look, we might allow X amount of time on that subject and away and leave this other one off, that kind of thing, you know, and that needs a bit of debate, I think. Yeah, but I think it's a really critical thing, and not just space and there are other things will come along that we need to make sure are part of our curriculum as well.
But even understanding, I suppose, even where the chemistry of all the elements comes from, the evolution of the elements and understanding the evolution going on all the time through the chemicals.
That's right. Yeah. And in fact, the biology bit, you can bring astronomy into biology because the Earth is 4.5 billion years old, you know. And one big question is, did we seed the Earth with life from meteorites, for instance? You know, so there's ways to get it in. You can sneak it in, Leah, sneak it into the curriculum through different routes, maybe. You know?
Put it into transition year and keep lobbying.
Yeah, that's it. Exactly. Yeah,
I suppose the message as well that I suppose in school we view subject areas very siloed. However, when they go into university, you know, things aren't as streamlined, and even when they go into careers, they're even less so. There's greater flexibility. So perhaps, you know, informing them that there'll be more areas that they can study down the line that will allow them to think about studying science just as a gateway to get to their maybe specialist area that they want to study.
And also, you know, remember, we tell this to them, the advances happen on the interface between different sciences, actually, you know. You often see things advancing because a mathematician talks to a biologist, for instance, and something new begins to happen, you know. So that's another thing to think about.
Okay, so, well, thank you very much for your contributions there. I'm just going to point out that Luke has actually allowed us to have a discount off his new book. It's only €21 on O'Mahony's until the 5th of December. So if you want to find out more about everything from space travel to evolution to AI, it's all there from, you know, a very accessible way to read about science. So I suppose I'm just going to thank Professor Luke O'Neill and also Professor Geraldine Mooney Simmie for their time today. I found that stories and examples you gave really, really useful. And I suppose just to, show that we'd over 50 teachers here in the room. Those 50 teachers are going to be teaching hundreds of students every year, and they will do that until probably 2060. So your time
My God,
today,
that's terrifying, isn't it?
Yeah, your time.
Although, Regina, mind you, if we keep making advances in immunology, you'll be living to 120. Watch. That's
Well, your time today is certainly something that will have impact, and it's really important that we work with our student teachers, you know, in order to be able to pass expertise. I'd like to thank also Louise Farrell and Helen Fitzgerald for organising today's session, Adrian McDonough and Deirdre O'Neill for their assistance with the IT stuff. And thank you very much for everyone who attended today. I hope you have a very safe weekend and that you enjoy, I suppose, the unique Irish cultural phenomena that is the toy show tonight.
Yeah. Let's see how much science is on the toy show. How about that?
Yeah, I thought you'd be on it. Are you not not on it.
No, sadly not. No.
Oh, unfortunate. So thank you very much for attending today. And I really enjoyed today's session. Thank
Great.
you.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Geraldine. Yeah, thanks,
Yeah,
Regina.
thank
Thanks,
you,
thanks
Luke.
to all the
All
students
right,
for tuning in
bye-bye.
as well.
Thanks, Regina.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.